What's up, everyone? Welcome to the video. We are here breaking down opening day for the 2023 MLB season for Thursday, March 30th. Right around the afternoon, we have a full slate of baseball. Should be a fun one. And we're breaking it down here for DraftKings and FanDuel. And if you do end up enjoying today's free content, if you can leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel, I would truly appreciate it. Let's get right into it. And as always, we'll start with the pitchers, then move on to the stacks. I'm not going to sit here and break down each and every single batter individually, because yes, there are some guys I like that aren't in the stacks that I talk about, but that's just going to be a very long video, and that's not what we're here for. I have all the projections, the model, the optimizer, ownership, all that fun stuff in cheat sheet, and the link down below in the description if you're interested in that. All right, but anyway, let's get into the pitchers here. We'll start up top with one of the best, Garrett Cole, 9,000 bucks on DraftKings, 10-9. Over on FanDuel. I'll tell you right now, on DraftKings, you can pretty much build whatever lineup you want. You can easily use Cole and Burns together and then stack the Braves. If you wanted, they're going to be very popular versus Patrick Corbin. So on FanDuel, I noticed it's not as easy, but you only have to pick one pitcher over there. But like I said, roster construction, pretty easy on opening day. But Garrett Cole going to be very popular here. I actually think I have him as my highest projected owned pitcher as of right now, although it's close up top. I mean, McClanahan's going to get a lot of ownership at that price point, but as of right now, I do have Garrett Cole. I think it's mainly just a safety net of we know he's not going to have to be pulled short in this game. I mean, he got up to nearly 90 pitches in his last spring training start, which another thing you have to worry about on opening day is how deep are some of these pitchers going to go, but that's not really a concern for Garrett Cole. We know he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. Facing the Giants here at home, about 3.3 implied team total against them. Decent chance for a win, which is always a nice bonus over on DraftKings. And really just on FanDuel as well. And looking at his numbers from last season, 32.5% K rate. Didn't really walk too many guys. 14.3 swinging strike rate. Didn't give up too much hard contact. The only issue with Garrett Cole is that he does get hit hard a couple of times a game, it seems like. So never be surprised if we see like a solo shot. Maybe from a guy like Jock Peterson in this game or Michael Conforto. About a 180 ISO last year. And nearly a 40% hard hit rate, which is kind of pretty much right up there with Hunter Green, who we know he had a ton of power issues last year. But again, that came in with strikeouts. But Garrett Cole, not really concerned here. And if you're looking for probably the safest option on the board, I think he's probably your best bet. Then moving down to Corbin Burns here, 8,800 bucks. Feels like a pretty fair price point for a guy who's just one of the best pitchers in baseball. 2.85 xFIP last season, 30.5% K rate. Doesn't really walk too many guys. A really healthy 15.1 swing strike rate, only a 5% barrel rate against him, limits the hard contact. Matchup versus the Cubs, they do have some new names this year, which does make their lineup a little bit better. Last year, striking out a ton versus righties and just a team that I picked on here and there. But they now have Dansby Swanson from the Braves. They have Cody Bellinger, projected batting cleanup here. Trey Mancini. Still Patrick Wisdom, who's always good for a ton of strikeouts last year. And they added Tucker Barnhart as well. So some new faces this season, like I said, where you can't completely rely on what that team did versus righties the past season because new names are going to change that up. But Corbin Burns, like I said, I'm always going to take elite pitching over an offense, and he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's on the road here, but only a 3.5 implied team total against him and a slight favorite. So I think Corbin Burns, if we can get 5+ innings out of him, should be able to pay off his price point. And moving down to Blake Snell here, who I actually like as a pivot off of a chalky Shane McClanahan in tournaments. Snell got up to 92 pitches, I believe, in his last spring start, so he's pretty stretched out. Now, the thing is with Blake Snell, 92 pitches, that's about 3 innings for him because he's never efficient whenever I roster him. But only a 3.2 implied team total against him. He's getting the Rockies outside of Coors Field, so that's always something we can pick on. Yes, they do have a couple guys that can mash left-handed pitching, like CJ Cron and Chris Bryant, but he's a pretty heavy favorite here. We know how good that Padres offense is, so if we can get 5 innings out of Blake Snell, which never an easy task, I will take that one bonus, though. I think he can pitch well enough to get the job done. 32% K rate last year. Like I said, though, he kind of eats up pitches in those innings because nearly a double-digit walk rate, but a really nice 14.7 swinging strike rate. Does a little bit of hard contact, but does limit the power overall. So at this price point versus a pretty weak Rockies team outside of Coors Field, I have no problem rostering Blake Snell, and the ownership should be lower than Shane McClanahan, who I do worry how deep they'll let him go in the game. We know the Rays can be a bit finicky with things like that. And I was searching through Twitter. I could not find his last pitch counts. I believe he got up to 60-ish pitches, I believe a couple of weeks ago. So we'll see how long he goes, but the price kind of makes up for it. If he was like around $9,000, I'd probably just take Garrett Cole. But we're getting Shane McClanahan, one of the best pitchers in baseball, in a great pitcher's park, at home, heavy favorite versus one of the worst offenses in baseball, the Detroit Tigers, a sub 3.0 implied team total against him. 65% chance for a win here according to Vegas, and the price point just really hard to pass up. I mean, a 2.6 xFIP last season, which is the best of this group we're talking about, 30.3% carry, which I realize shows up red, but usually it's a larger pool of players, but I just kind of throw those guys out, so that's the reason why. Doesn't make too many mistakes. Sub 6% walk rate, 15.5 swinging strike rate, 50% ground ball rate. Doesn't allow much hard contact whatsoever. And like I said, great park to pitch in. And if you're looking at how they fared versus lefties last season, Tigers weren't very good. So while Shane will be chalky, I realize the matchup is fantastic, but there's certainly pivots we can get to. Then you have a wild card here in Hunter Green, who ended the season very well last year. $7,400 on DK, 91 on FanDuel. It's a great matchup versus the Pittsburgh Pirates, who outside of O'Neal Cruz and Brian Reynolds aren't going to really offer too much resistance. But there is some flaws here, and while I think Hunter Green is viable, and I think the ownership is actually going to be pretty decent on him, I think at the same time you can stack the Pirates against him. So if you're doing like a 3 max or a 20 max, I would have some Hunter Green lineups, but at the same time I'd have some Pittsburgh Pirate lineups because I could see this going completely 2 ways. So we'll see how it goes, but I could see Hunter Green mowing these guys down with his 31% K rate last year. But I could also see him giving up a couple of bombs, especially in a very hitter-friendly park in Great American Small Park and near 200 ISO last year. 9.4% barrel rate, 40% hard hit rate, 90 exit velocity on average, looking at some of the StatCast numbers. So we got to be careful. And like I said, he's a wild card. I would have some stacks against him, and I'd also have some lineups using Hunter Green as well. So I could see it going 2 ways. And before we get into these stacks, I have to mention the sponsors of the show, Prize Picks and Underdog. And if you are a new user on either site, you can use promo code CPENNY, get an instant deposit match bonus up to $100. And if you love baseball, which I assume you do watching this video, they have tons of props on both sites. None posted right now. I'm recording this a couple days in advance, but they'll start to populate soon. You can bet on the strikeouts for certain pitchers, total bases, runs in the first innings, and the list goes on. Honestly, a lot of things you probably didn't even think were on there. So it's super fun to play on, and I'm always doing those once throughout the entire season because I think it's awesome, and I don't live in a legal betting state. So this is kind of work a way around it. It's DFS and prop betting mixed together. So again, that's promo code CPEN. You can find that down in the description down below. Take advantage of that bonus money they're offering you to help build your bankroll. All right, so moving back to the stacks here, and these are just some early projections, but these are the top stacks for me, projected ownership value projection, and I do post these every single day. So if you want access to them, links down below in the description. But let's just look at who Vegas has as the top teams here in Boston versus Kyle Gibson, Atlanta versus Corbin, Baltimore versus Kluber, Minnesota versus Greinke, Cincy versus Mitch Keller, all really makes sense to me. And while Pittsburgh is a little bit lower, my projections like them. It's a nice ballpark shift going to Cincy, and we know the power issues that Hunter Green can have. He can make some mistakes, so they're picking up some ownership and actually showing up as some pretty decent value as well as a whole. So let's move on to the actual stacks here in the lineups tab, and let's talk about Atlanta first here versus Patrick Corbin. A lot over 200 ISO versus right-handed bats last year, and I think the lefties are certainly in play. We only have 2 in the projected lineup as of right now, but Acuna, we know he can mash lefties, just put up their splits versus them. Wasn't as good versus them last year as he was versus righties, but we know he's still good versus lefties. Matt Olson, he's the guy that people might leave off of stacks. I would not do that. He can still do plenty of damage versus lefties. I've seen it myself. I've rostered him versus lefties plenty of times, and he has nearly 200 ISO versus them since last season. Austin Riley, 342 ISO. Make sure you get him in your lineups, only $4,600. Sean Murphy's cheap at catcher. Marcell Ozuna's below 3K, and we know he can do some damage versus lefties, although last year wasn't too pretty, but we'll give him a pass on that. He's still cheap enough and a great offense. Ozzie Albies, over 200 ISO versus lefties last year. And then Michael Harris, Travis d'Arnaud, Orlando Arcia. This entire lineup is playable. They're, I believe, my top projected team here, so I'll be getting a ton of Braves, and they're really not that hard to fit in besides around Acuna. Even if you want to leave off Acuna, you can still put a pretty good stack together because this offense is loaded. Then another stack I have a ton of interest in is the Twins facing off versus the corpse of Zach Greinke. The guy is just getting so old, and while he's not the worst pitcher out there, doesn't allow a ton of power, he's just not going to miss bats, and these guys are going to put the ball in play. And we have a pretty good lineup here for the Twins. So looking at Greinke last year, 4.5 xFIP, only 12.5% K rate, 4.6% walk rate. So yeah, he's going to give these guys some balls to hit. And while Greinke's not a guy that I expect to get blown up super often, he doesn't really get blown up, this is still a good team that I want exposure to. And outside of 2 guys, very affordable as well. Joey Gallo potentially leading off here at $3,100. We know he's not the most consistent guy out there, and he can miss plenty of balls, but it's a good matchup versus Greinke because he's not going to have too much swing and miss stuff at this point of his career. So Joey Gallo, $3,100. There's some power upside there. Carlos Correa, new addition. to the Minnesota Twins, although it seemed like he was a new addition to about 3 teams last year. But finally landed in Minnesota. Byron Buxton, one of the best players in baseball, over 300 ISO in general last year. Max Kepler, a guy I love using versus righties. I like that price point. And the rest of these guys are viable, although it does fall off a cliff a little bit after Max Kepler, but I do think the Twins are certainly going to be in play here. Then we have Boston facing off versus the Orioles here in Fenway, which is a pretty hitter-friendly park. And while Gibson is not the worst pitcher out there, I wouldn't say he's great. He's not someone I'm looking to fade batters against. About 170 ISO versus lefties last year, 168 I believe versus righties. This is a good enough lineup to get some damage done. Specifically Devers. I mean, Devers is going to be one of the top spots on the entire slate if you can afford him. But Verdugo, lefty and righty, should be batting cleanup. Don't mind him. Justin Turner. I was at the spring training game where he got hit in the face and his face exploded. It was brutal versus Detroit, but looks like he's going to be good to go batting third. Don't mind him at $4,000. Really just the entire lineup. Masataka Yoshida, $4,400 batting cleanup. Lefty on righty matchup here. I think there's plenty of upside with that. Adam Duvall. It drops off a little bit after that, but I still think Boston's in a very good spot, and they do have one of the highest implied team totals on these slates, so I'd certainly be looking to get some Boston exposure. And on the flip side of this game, I don't mind the Orioles versus the ghost of Corey Kluber. Like, I'm a big Indians fan. I love Corey Kluber when he was with us, but he's definitely past his prime these days. Not going to be winning any more Cy Youngs. So I do not mind the Orioles here. They should have some lower ownership. Their team total is not as high at 4.57, but this is not the worst lineup out there. I know the Orioles don't have the greatest name value to them, but I mean, Cedric Mullins is obviously great. $5,400 though seems a bit expensive, but he's in a good spot versus Kluber. Adley Rutschman, one of the more up-and-coming players in the league. Ryan Mountcastle, Anthony Santander, who's got plenty of pop batting cleanup. Gunnar Henderson as well, one of the more up-and-coming players in the league. Austin Hayes is a guy that I use a ton versus lefties. Tons of pop versus them. Not as great versus righties, but again, this is a pretty good matchup versus Corey Kluber, and I really have no concerns about the matchup whatsoever. So the Orioles are a team that I'm looking to get to. Both sides of this game look pretty good, and the Orioles should have lower ownership, so I don't think they're a bad tournament spot. Then the last team I want to talk about, I kind of already mentioned this when I was talking about Hunter Green at pitcher, but at the same time, while I think he's viable, at the same time, I think the Pirates are viable as well. I know this lineup isn't great outside of O'Neal Cruz and Brian Reynolds, and really after that, it falls off bad. You have the ghost of Andrew McCutchen, who's back this year, Carlos Santana, G-Man Choi, Brian Hayes. Like, the first 6, okay. It's okay. Jake Sawinski, I don't mind him at the price point. The bottom 2 I'd have a really hard time getting to, but this is not the worst stack out there, and they're showing a lot of value in the model. So if we can just get them to pop off for maybe a couple of homers and do a little bit of damage versus Green, who should be at somewhat high ownership, it's a nice leverage play over in tournaments. I know these guys aren't great, but if you're looking at the numbers overall, O'Neal Cruz, we know he's a huge talent. Over a 200 ISO last year. Brian Reynolds just under a 200 ISO. 148 for Andrew McCutchen, 174 for Carlos Santana. G-Man Choi's got some pop versus righties. It's not showing up. Must be a name error on the G-Man there. I think there might be a hyphen. But I don't mind it. And also, Jack Sawinski, looking at his splits versus right-handed pitching, I don't mind him as a cheap play. 237 batting average, which isn't amazing, but a 228 ISO and a 122 WRC plus. So if we're looking for some cheap pop in a good park versus a hitter that allows pop, Jack Sawinski might be one of the better value plays on the slate. But with that being said, guys, that's all I got for you for today's video. If you did enjoy, make sure you like down below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you all next time.